For 3 decades, this fastidious man was trapped in a horrifying professional predicament, required to sit within intimate proximity of some of Hollywood's most hygienically challenged personalities, breathing their air, sharing their space, and somehow maintaining his composed, unflappable demeanor while enduring sensory assaults that would have sent most people fleeing from the building. What follows are the true stories that NBC executives hoped would never come to light, the revolting behind-the-scenes reality of what Johnny Carson endured in the name of entertainment. These aren't just amusing anecdotes, they're shocking revelations about what really happened when the camera stopped rolling and the smell became too overwhelming for even television's greatest professional to endure.
That's right. I don't handle it well. You and Really you don't? I don't handle alcohol well at all, no. Really don't.
6. The heavy smoker era, a toxic cloud of celebrity stench. Before we dive into individual offenders, we must acknowledge the nauseating baseline conditions that Carson endured throughout the first 2 decades of his tenure. Today's antiseptic television studios bear no resemblance to the toxic environment of 1960s and 1970s broadcasting, a literal fog of carcinogenic chemicals that created what longtime crew members called celebrity soup. The studio wasn't just smoky, it was a hazardous environment that would violate every workplace safety standard today, revealed former NBC page Thomas Wilson. Celebrities would chain smoke through pre-interviews, continue during their segments, and leave behind a revolting film of nicotine that coated every surface. The situation was made exponentially worse by the celebrities who combined their tobacco habits with other pungent signatures. Betty Davis, a frequent guest, created what crew members secretly called the Davis Cloud, a noxious combination of her trademark cigarettes, heavy perfume, and bourbon-soaked breath that literally changed the air quality of the studio. After Davis appeared, we had to use industrial fans between tapings, confessed set decorator Marion Lewis. Her particular aroma would linger so persistently that guests scheduled after her would sometimes comment, "Did Bette Davis just leave?" without being told she had been there. It was like her ghost haunted the furniture. Dean Martin elevated the challenge to truly shocking levels when he appeared, combining cigarettes with his infamous alcohol consumption. What viewers never saw was the disturbing reality that by the time Martin reached the couch, he had often already consumed so much alcohol that his pores were actively expelling it into the air around him. Sitting next to Dean was like being hit with a physical wave, Carson once confided to his producer after a particularly pungent Martin appearance. It wasn't just breath. It was coming through his skin. I could taste it in my mouth while trying to interview him. The toll this took on the fastidious host was visible only to those who knew him best. Makeup artist Teresa Williams recalled the alarming post-segment ritual. Johnny would immediately retreat to his dressing room, where he kept a special mouthwash. He said he could taste their cigarettes, even though he hadn't smoked himself. He would gargle so aggressively, I worried he might damage his throat. The situation reached such extreme levels during a 1974 appearance by actor George Siegel that a truly disturbing behind-the-scenes incident occurred. Siegel, a notoriously heavy smoker, had been puffing away so continuously that during a commercial break, Carson was seen discreetly vomiting into a wastebasket, overcome by the concentration of smoke in his immediate vicinity. Johnny never complained on air, never, emphasized former NBC executive Frank Milton, but that night, he told the executive producer either Siegel needed to stop smoking or Johnny was walking off set. It was the only time I ever saw him make that kind of ultimatum. What viewers at home never realized was that Carson's famous water sips weren't just for his throat. They were a desperate attempt to combat the drying effect of sitting in what amounted to a smoke sauna for 90 minutes each night. His documentary-worthy poker face hid the revolting reality that beneath the desk, Carson's knuckles would often turn white as he gripped his chair, fighting the urge to flee from the toxic cloud enveloping him.
Did you hear the one about the woman goes to the dentist?
To have the tooth out?
Yeah. And he looks in the mouth, he says, that tooth will have to...
5. Buddy Hackett, the human sprinkler system. Comedy legend Buddy Hackett made over 100 appearances on The Tonight Show, delighting audiences with his rubber-faced humor and outrageous stories. But the disturbing truth behind these seemingly jovial interviews would have horrified viewers had they known what Johnny was really enduring. Hackett suffered from what medical professionals call hypersalivation, combined with an apparent obliviousness to the concept of personal space. The result was what Tonight Show staff referred to in horrified whispers as The splash zone, the area around Hackett that would end up literally wet by the end of his segments. It wasn't just occasional spittle, it was a constant spray that increased with his excitement, revealed cue card holder Martin Jenkins. The first 3 feet around Buddy was essentially a mist. Johnny would return from commercial breaks with his suit jacket visibly spotted with moisture. It was disgusting. Carson, whose pathological aversion to bodily fluids was well documented, developed specific defensive techniques for Hackett interviews that attentive viewers might have noticed. He perfected what staff called the Hackett lean, a seemingly casual posture that actually maximized his distance while appearing engaged. More shocking was the revelation that Carson wore a specially treated suit for Hackett appearances. Wardrobe applied a clear, water-resistant coating to Johnny's suit on Hackett days, confessed Carson's personal dresser, Harold Ming. It was the same treatment used on raincoats, modified to look natural on camera. Johnny insisted on it after a particularly moist interview in 1968, when Hackett's storytelling left visible droplets on Johnny's sleeve that the camera picked up. The most disturbing incident occurred during a 1975 appearance when Hackett became particularly animated while recounting a Vegas anecdote. In his excitement, he unleashed what one horrified camera operator described as a full-on spray that hit Johnny directly in the face. While viewers saw Carson throw his head back in laughter, they missed the alarming reality. He was desperately wiping saliva from his eyes during the cutaway shot. After that incident, Johnny had a complete change of clothes waiting in his dressing room, revealed production assistant Kevin Bartley. The moment the segment ended, he bolted off set, stripped down, and actually showered before returning for the next guest. He was that traumatized. What makes this situation particularly shocking is that despite this revolting experience, Carson continued to invite Hackett back repeatedly. This wasn't just professionalism, it revealed Carson's understanding that great television sometimes required personal sacrifice. As he grimly joked to Ed McMahon after a particularly damp Hackett session, "I deserve a Purple Heart and hazard pay for that interview." The crew developed elaborate systems to manage what they euphemistically called Hackett aftermath. This included a specially designated Hackett towel, used only to dry the host's desk area and chair after the comedian's appearances. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that the upholstery of the famous Tonight Show couch had to be completely replaced after a stretch of 3 Hackett appearances in a single month wore through the fabric's water-resistant treatment.
Penny Singleton is nickel doubleton. It's all going up. Pumpernickel's pump a dime. Pick one. I'm in trouble up here.
4. Rip Taylor, the human geyser. Known as the King of Confetti for his habit of tossing paper scraps into the audience, Rip Taylor brought manic energy to every television appearance. But his 1977 Tonight Show visit became legendary among the crew for reasons so revolting that network executives attempted to bury the story for decades. Taylor arrived at the studio already exhibiting signs of what production documents later diplomatically called excessive perspiration. The reality, according to multiple witnesses, was far more alarming. Taylor appeared to be actively melting under the influence of what many suspected were powerful stimulants. "I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of television," recalled lighting director Samuel Peterson. "He wasn't just sweating, he was leaking. It was as if his body was actively rejecting all moisture. By the time he hit the couch, there was a visible sheen covering every inch of exposed skin." Carson's reaction, though hidden from viewers, was documented in several staff accounts. When Taylor first approached for their handshake, Johnny visibly hesitated before committing to the greeting, a microsecond of reluctance that spoke volumes to those who knew of his contamination fears. What the cameras didn't show was Carson discreetly wiping his hand on the underside of his desk immediately afterward. Johnny's hand came away literally dripping, revealed floor director Thomas Allen. The look on his face was one of pure horror, though he recovered instantly. His professionalism was superhuman. As the interview progressed, the situation deteriorated to truly nightmarish proportions. Under the hot studio lights, Taylor's perspiration increased to levels that threatened the electronic equipment. His polyester shirt became so saturated that it changed color on camera, transforming from light blue to navy as it absorbed impossible amounts of sweat. The most shocking moment came during a particularly animated story when Taylor leapt up to demonstrate a physical comedy bit. The sudden movement created what one cameraman described in his memoirs as a literal spray pattern that momentarily reflected in the studio lights like a sprinkler system. Droplets visibly rained down on Carson's desk, creating a situation so disturbing that Ed McMahon later admitted he nearly broke character on air. Johnny's face froze in what we called his crisis mask, the expression he used when something was going catastrophically wrong, but he couldn't acknowledge it, recalled producer Michael Sloan. His eyes took on a 1,000-yard stare while his smile remained fixed. It was the face of a man enduring profound trauma while pretending everything was normal. The full horror of the situation was revealed only during the commercial break, when viewers couldn't see the frantic activity occurring on set. Carson immediately summoned his personal assistant, who rushed forward with a towel and hand sanitizer, items that were not commonly used in the 1970s, but which Carson insisted on having available. The guest chair was literally dripping, requiring production assistants to blot it with towels before the next guest could be seated. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that Taylor seemed completely unaware of his condition. When a well-meaning makeup artist approached during the break offering blotting papers, Taylor cheerfully declined, saying, "Honey, this is just how I sparkle." After this appearance, Carson implemented what staff called the Taylor Protocol, a set of defensive measures to be enacted whenever similarly moist guests were booked. These included a plastic liner discreetly placed on the guest chair, positioning Carson an additional 6 inches away from the guest than normal, and having replacement clothing accessible for emergency situations. Taylor's bookings on The Tonight Show mysteriously decreased after this incident, though Carson never publicly commented on the reason. Years later, a former NBC executive confirmed the shocking truth. Johnny told the talent bookers, "I don't mind funny, but I can't handle drowning on my own show."
Sherry, as you know, or Sherry's sack was fortified and is fortified with brandy. It's strong.
3. Orson Welles, the human hothouse. By the time Orson Welles became a regular on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, the once dashing director of Citizen Kane had transformed into a physically imposing presence whose genius remained intact, while his body had expanded to truly shocking proportions. This created a hygiene situation so extreme that it required specialized protocols unlike anything else in the show's history. Welles, who stood 6 feet 1 inch and weighed well over 300 pounds in his later years, created what the crew secretly referred to as the Orson effect, a localized climate change that occurred within minutes of his taking his seat under the studio lights. The combination of his massive frame, multiple layers of dark clothing, chosen to minimize his appearance of size, and the hot lights created a perfect storm of perspiration that horrified the fastidious Carson. "The heat coming off him was measurable," claimed former set technician Harold Barnes. "We actually recorded a 7-degree temperature increase in his immediate vicinity. It was like sitting next to a human furnace, and the resulting effect on his personal freshness was exactly what you'd imagine." The situation was made exponentially worse by Welles's mobility issues, which prevented quick trips to freshen up during commercial breaks. Instead, the production team developed an elaborate system that staff documents referred to as cooling the Orson, but which crew members more candidly called crisis management. "We had industrial strength fans positioned just off camera," revealed assistant director Gary Mitchell. "The moment we hit commercial, we'd aim these powerful fans directly at Welles to try to dry him before the next segment. Meanwhile, makeup artists would rush in with specialized products designed for extreme perspiration control. It was like a NASCAR pit crew working on a human being." The disturbing reality that viewers never saw was the progressive deterioration of Welles' freshness throughout his appearances. While he typically arrived relatively dry and well-presented by the 15-minute mark of an interview, his condition had usually deteriorated dramatically. His custom-made shirts, despite being made of absorbent materials, would become saturated to the point where they changed texture visibly on camera. Carson's reaction to this situation revealed both his professionalism and his private horror. Microphones occasionally picked up the host subtly sniffing after Welles made particularly expansive gestures, an involuntary reaction to the wave of aroma that accompanied such movements. Production notes from several Welles appearances include the cryptic instruction, "JC needs extra space for OW segment." The most shocking incident occurred during a summer broadcast in 1975 when the studio's air conditioning malfunctioned during Welles's appearance. Within minutes, the director's perspiration reached such alarming levels that it began to spread visibly across his clothing, creating what one camera operator described as continental drift patterns of moisture. The situation became so extreme that during a commercial break, Carson was seen physically moving his chair several inches farther away. a breach of his usual perfect positioning that spoke volumes about the sensory emergency unfolding. After this appearance, Wells required the assistance of 2 production assistants to rise from the guest chair, which had become so thoroughly saturated that it had to be removed from the set entirely. The horrifying truth, revealed years later by a cleaning staff member, was that the cushion had to be completely replaced rather than merely cleaned. What makes this situation particularly poignant is that despite these challenges, Carson maintained genuine respect for Wells's genius and continued to welcome him as a guest. As Carson later confided to a producer, "Some people are worth enduring discomfort for. Orson is one of them. But for God's sake, make sure we have the industrial fans ready."
Especially by hanging, because it's really...
2. Truman Capote, Chemical Warfare. Truman Capote's evolution from literary wunderkind to troubled cultural icon played out across his many appearances on The Tonight Show. In his early visits during the 1960s, Capote was the very picture of fastidious elegance. By the mid-1970s, however, he had transformed into something that Tonight Show staff came to describe in horrified whispers as the Chemical Man. What viewers never knew was the shocking extent of preparation required before Capote could even appear on camera. Makeup artists spoke of the Capote Challenge, attempting to make the visibly deteriorating author presentable despite what one stylist described as a canvas that had been through war. His skin had a grayish tinge that no amount of makeup could fully correct, revealed longtime makeup artist Diane Forster. His eyes were often bloodshot to a degree that was alarming, and his personal hygiene had deteriorated to the point where we had to develop specialized techniques just to mask the most obvious issues. These techniques included what staff called the full capote, a multi-stage process that involved powerful concealer to hide broken capillaries, extra-strength powder to absorb excess oil that would appear within minutes under the lights, and most disturbing of all, a specially formulated cologne created specifically to mask what one production assistant described as the unmistakable bouquet of someone who had been drinking for several days continuously. Carson's reaction to late-period Capote revealed the depth of his professionalism and the extent of his personal discomfort. The host, who could detect the slightest imperfection in his own appearance, found himself seated next to a man who increasingly resembled, as one crew member cruelly but accurately noted, something that had been briefly rescued from a shipwreck. Johnny developed what we called the Capote position, revealed longtime camera operator Mitchell Stevens. He would begin interviews in his standard posture, but as the segments progressed and Capote's various aromas activated under the lights, Carson would incrementally increase the distance between them. By the third segment, he was practically hanging off the edge of his chair. It was subtle enough that viewers wouldn't notice, but dramatic enough that we had to adjust camera angles to compensate. The most shocking aspect of Capote's appearances was what staff referred to as the cologne situation. In a misguided attempt to mask his lack of freshness, Capote began wearing increasingly powerful scents. The combination of these heavy fragrances with his natural state created what one audio technician described as an olfactory experience so complex and overwhelming it could make your eyes water from 10 feet away. During one particularly disturbing appearance in 1979, Capote arrived in what appeared to be the same clothing he had worn for several days. Despite the best efforts of the makeup and wardrobe team, they could not completely disguise what the production log diplomatically called evidence of recent dining experiences on his jacket. More alarmingly, he had apparently applied cologne multiple times without bathing in between applications, creating what chemists would call a layering effect of fragrance on top of the biological reality beneath. Johnny's reaction was something I'll never forget, recalled production assistant Linda Martinez. During the commercial break, he turned to Ed McMahon and whispered, "I think I'm being chemically attacked." Then he called for his personal assistant and had his jacket removed and replaced with an identical one because he was convinced Capote's aroma had transferred onto his clothing. The horrifying climax of Capote's Tonight Show hygiene saga came during what would be one of his final appearances on the program. Visibly unsteady and sweating profusely under the lights, Capote began to emanate what one crew member described as waves of sour cologne and bodily distress. The situation became so extreme that Carson, in an unprecedented break from his perfect hosting protocol, actually stood up during Capote's anecdote, ostensibly to demonstrate something, but actually to escape the immediate vicinity temporarily. After that segment, Johnny had the commercial break extended by 30 seconds, revealed Assistant Director Peter Coleman. He used that time to literally gasp for air in the wings before returning. It was the only time I ever saw him struggle to maintain his composure. Despite these challenges, Carson continued to book Capote out of respect for his literary importance and their long professional relationship. But after particularly difficult appearances, Carson would implement what staff called the Capote Recovery Protocol, a multi-step process that included changing his clothing, using a special mouthwash, and having the guest chair removed for deep cleaning before the next guest could be seated.
I looked like a complete asshole, and I felt like one. No.
1. Charles Bukowski, Biohazard Alert. If Johnny Carson was the epitome of television polish, Charles Bukowski represented his antimatter, a deliberate rejection of every hygiene standard Carson held sacred. The poet and novelist known as the Laureate of American Lowlife brought an authentic whiff of his Skid Row aesthetic to The Tonight Show, creating what remains the most legendary hygiene disaster in the program's storied history. What made Bukowski's 1975 appearance unique wasn't just the standard challenges of a disheveled guest. It was the shocking fact that his personal aroma actually triggered a previously unknown clause in NBC's technical staff contract regarding hazardous working conditions. When Bukowski arrived at the studio, the initial reaction was one of stunned disbelief, recalled talent coordinator Richard Peterson. He hadn't just neglected to prepare for a national television appearance, he appeared to have actively cultivated a state of biological distress that defied conventional description. Makeup artists, typically unflappable after decades of working with celebrities in various states, documented their encounter with unprecedented candor in the production notes. Subject appears to have multiple layers of body odor, suggesting an extended period without bathing. Hair contains unknown substances and possible small insects. Skin has film that resists standard cleansing products. Breath suggests medical intervention may be appropriate. The horrifying reality was that Bukowski had apparently spent the 48 hours before his Tonight Show appearance engaged in what he considered appropriate preparation, a continuous drinking binge at various Los Angeles dive bars. He arrived at the studio not merely unprepared, but actively deteriorating. The wardrobe department literally refused to touch his jacket, revealed assistant producer Michael Coleman. They used wooden hangers and tongs to manage his clothing, and the head of wardrobe threatened to file a union grievance if she was required to make physical contact with his belongings. Carson's reaction upon first meeting Bukowski created what staff still refer to as the legendary moment, a split-second breach in the host's perfect professional facade that revealed the shocking reality beneath. As Bukowski approached for their pre-show greeting, Carson visibly flinched and took an instinctive step backward before recovering his composure. Johnny's face went through about 5 expressions in 1 second, recalled stage manager Thomas Wilson. Horror, disgust, panic, resignation, and then his professional mask clicked back into place. It was like watching someone get hit with a stun gun and recover in real time. The interview itself became an exercise in Carson's superhuman professionalism. Seated next to what one camera operator described as a human petri dish, Carson maintained his engaged, attentive demeanor while employing every defensive technique in his arsenal. He positioned himself at the maximum possible distance while still appearing conversational, angled his body slightly away while keeping his face turned toward Bukowski, and employed what staff called the emergency breath technique, breathing primarily through his mouth to minimize olfactory input. The disturbing behind-the-scenes reality was that Carson was experiencing genuine physical distress during the segment. During the first commercial break, his longtime personal assistant rushed to the host with a handkerchief that had been treated with mentholated oil, a theatrical trick used when actors must appear in scenes with overwhelming smells. Johnny was actually nauseated, confirmed production assistant William Turner. I could see him swallowing repeatedly during Bukowski's responses, the universal sign of someone fighting not to vomit, yet on camera, he appeared totally at ease. It was the most impressive performance I've ever seen. The situation reached crisis level during the second segment when the studio lights, which had been heating Bukowski for several minutes, activated what one horrified audio technician called the full aromatic experience. The smell became so powerful that a camera operator positioned near the interview area reportedly had to be replaced after experiencing what the production log described as involuntary eye-watering, affecting his ability to maintain focus. The most shocking revelation came years later when Carson's personal physician confirmed that the host had actually required medical intervention following the Bukowski interview. Johnny developed a migraine headache so severe that he needed prescription medication, Dr. Samuel Richards revealed in a 2010 interview. He called me from his dressing room immediately after the taping, and I had to prescribe something stronger than his usual medication. He told me it was a direct result of what he called sensory assault during the interview. What makes this story particularly remarkable is that despite this traumatic experience, Carson later told his producer that Bukowski had been one of his most interesting guests. "Sometimes greatness doesn't smell great," he reportedly said. "That's the price of authenticity." The guest chair where Bukowski had sat became the subject of what staff called the Great Cleaning Debate, with some arguing it should be professionally sanitized and others insisting it should be completely replaced. According to multiple sources, the chair was eventually removed from the set and never returned, the only time in the show's history that a piece of furniture was permanently decommissioned due to a guest's personal hygiene.